Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, as far as questions, I will address some of the questions that were submitted in advance when you registered, and then take questions from those assembled thereafter. So hello, everyone. Thanks for spending some time on your Sunday to learn about green burial. We have a lot to cover, so let's get started. I'll share my screen. Hold on. Okay. Okay. So, green burial. If you're not familiar with green burial, you may think of it as a new trend. In fact, it's more like a return to the way we used to care and bury the dead up until the Civil War and the turn of the century. And by turn of the century, I mean the 20th century. So let's briefly look back at how we got here. Back then, families and the local community cared for the dead at home. It was a final act of love. Families did all the rituals and the body preparation. Maybe the local cabinet maker made the casket. Burials were either in the backyard, on the farm, or in the churchyard cemetery. These were very human healing events. And it won't advance. I can't get it to, oh, there it goes. Okay, so, but during the Civil War, embalming became very popular. You know, there was embalming in ancient Egyptian times. It was mostly essential oils, but the more toxic solutions that were used in modern times began in a big way during the Civil War, as fallen soldiers from the North who had died in battle in the South, whose bodies had to be transported north for burial. And you know, in those days, transported was most likely a very slow moving train. There wasn't refrigeration, etc. The success of these battlefield embalmers led a lot of amateurs to open up storefronts and to prey on families at home who also wanted to preserve their loved ones. So that caused the government to step in and restrict the practice to just licensed professionals. Thus, the funeral profession was born, and after death care was moved from the parlor at home to the funeral parlor. But what really popularized embalming and was a boon to the industry was the prominent display of President Lincoln's well-preserved corpse as he took a 13-day train ride back to Springfield, Illinois for burial from Washington, D.C. But even before the advent of the funeral professionals, crowded U.S. town centers and churchyards, cemeteries gave rise to the establishment of sprawling lawn cemeteries in rural areas. Today, the first, was in Cambridge, Massachusetts, built in 1831. Today, there are more than 20,000 registered cemeteries in the US. But as you can see in the slide, there's some problems in terms of toxic chemical use and wasted resources. Let's look at the numbers. Conventional burial each year buries a ton of toxins and wasted resources. To put it in perspective, the amount of embalming fluid that you see that's used annually is enough to fill 1.5 Olympic-sized swimming pools. This fluid has formaldehyde, as does the wood stains used in the varnishes of many of the very high gloss caskets that people use. And this toxin gets into the soil and the groundwater. As you look at the amount of hardwood, that's enough to build 4.5 million houses. So in addition to these resources getting buried and the energy used to make them is the energy used to transport them. It's a big waste, and it amounts to basically toxic landfills and wasted resources and money. So people started taking note of this and looking for a better way. and their efforts were spearheaded by baby boomers and spiritual communities. Thus began green burial. As defined by the Green Burial Council, green burial is a way for caring for the dead with minimal environmental impact that aids in the conservation of natural resources, the reduction of carbon emissions, the protection of worker health, and restoration and/or preservation of the habitat. The Green Burial Council quote that came from is like the Good Housekeeping seal of approval for all things green burial. So I encourage you to visit their site to learn more. The first natural cemetery opened up in the US in 1998, but it really was the founding of the Green Burial Council in 2005 that established standards of certification for providers. And by providers, I mean funeral homes, cemeteries, funeral product manufacturers. And it also gave the public a trusted resource for finding these providers, as well as great information that would be reliable. Below, you see the basic tenets of green burial, and it covers both mortuary and burial practices and products. It prohibits embalming, and technically embalming is not legally required. It does not allow burial containers made from high polished veneers or those that have metal trims or synthetic liners. It prefers that the containers be biodegradable or made from sustainable materials. Vaults and grave liners also are not legally required. Cemeteries, some conventional cemeteries may require them, but they're not legally required. And for green burial, they're not allowed. Not only are they committed to reducing carbon emissions, but green burial sequesters 25 pounds of carbon per person. And when you talk about land management and restoration of the natural habitat, that not only refers to plantings, but for the grave markers. And you'll see in upcoming slides that you won't see granite headstones that we're used to in conventional cemeteries. They're flat, or they're names engraved in a boulder, or nothing at all. And you just find the bodies by GPS, but it's supposed to blend in. And another consideration is the protection of worker health. Let's look more closely at some of the containers you see here. Eco-friendly containers can be had for full body or cremated remains, which we refer to shorthand as cremains. On the top right, you see a shroud. In New Jersey, you don't even have to be buried in, legally, you don't have to be buried in a casket. But again, some conventional cemeteries will not allow you to be buried just in a shroud. So you could opt to have a shroud be what you're dressed in the casket, but that shroud should be made of pea silk, organic cotton, or other natural fibers. Below it, you see a plain pine box casket. No metal trim, no metal fasteners, unvarnished, plain, doesn't inhibit decomposition or interfere with or cause havoc to the environment. In the center are two options for cremains. The first is a double. It's made of pressed paper. Below it, you see an attractive one that could be used at a funeral, as well as buried, made from untreated woods. And on the left, you see an alternative casket option. This one's made from woven seagrass. And as you can see, you have to pay attention to the lining as well. It's not that satin synthetic. It's most likely muslin or organic cotton. As far as green cemeteries, as I said, they seek not to interfere with decomposition. When you have a concrete fault or a varnished or steel casket and embalming, although embalming is only temporary, you are interfering with decomposition, but green cemeteries pledge not to. You should know there's 3 levels of green cemeteries according to the GBC. First is hybrid, where an established cemetery will assign a certain portion exclusively for green burials, but they have conventional on the other part. Then there's the natural cemeteries that are all about green burials and nothing else. And the third level is conservation burial grounds. I encourage you to go to the Green Burial website to understand more about them. But some things are common to them that you see here bulleted, as well as represented by the pictures below. They encourage more family engagement. So here you see, rather than a mechanized lowering of the body, the family is getting involved to lower it. Many green cemeteries will also let the family put some of the dirt back to close the grave. The graves are not manicured. There's no lawns requiring mowing and fertilizing and all that. This is intended to blend into the natural surroundings. Excuse me. And then, as we talked about, the grave markers are flat and made from natural substances so that they fit in. Okay, where are you? Can you find green burial in New Jersey was a common question I received. Everything on this list is certified, if you has an asterisk, is certified by the Green Burial Council. So there's 10 funeral homes in New Jersey that have been certified. And that means if they're certified, that they offer refrigeration or non-toxic embalming materials if the family does want to have embalming, that they offer at least 3 eco-friendly burial containers among the others that they offer. And because green burial does not require, nor legally is it required, to have a vault or a grave liner, they won't, push it on the families. But as you look at this list, I would encourage you to do research and go a little further into how they offer green burial, because some of them you really have to dig to see anything referencing green versus others feature it very prominently. As far as green cemeteries, the GBC certifies just 2, both in southern New Jersey, but I added the 2 others that you see because they fulfill the requirements, but they didn't go for certification. And, there could be many reasons why, but Mary Rest in particular is in northern New Jersey, but it's the first Catholic hybrid cemetery in New Jersey. So there's the conventional side, and then they have an area for natural burials. Also not on the list, and it would be too many names to add, are Jewish funeral homes and cemeteries, because they are inherently green. They don't embalm the dead. They don't require, the cemeteries don't require vaults or grave liners. Therefore, the funeral homes aren't selling them. And if you are very traditional, you might opt for the plain pine box, as I had shown before. So you're a lot of the way there by having a traditional Jewish burial. Later, we'll get into some other things people could do to further green their conventional burial. But as I said, Jewish burials are inherently pretty green. I also listed an outfit called Destination Destiny. I think their website is destinationdestinymemorials.com. And they're one-stop shopping, not just for natural burial, but for 2 other options we'll talk more about later. Full disclosure, they are owned by the founder of Steelmantown Cemetery, so the natural burial takes place there. And his name is Ed Bixby, is also the current president of the Green Burial Council. Well, even if green burial sounds interesting and a lot of people are opting for it, in fact, I heard from one green cemetery, a hybrid, who told me that at their cemetery, that the demand for green burial is overtaking conventional burial. Still the most popular method of body disposition in America today is flame cremation. You see the statistic. It's already more than 50% of Americans, and it's projected to be over 65 by 2025. Those percentages, by the way, are national averages, because in states where burial ground is scarce, like Hawaii and Nevada, the percentages are even higher. What's the reasons? Well, on the practical side, it is the least expensive option, especially, it's not green, but it is the least expensive option, and especially if you go for direct cremation. As I said, cemetery space is not widely available in some areas and shrinking. Even Arlington National Cemetery is running out of space. But it's another reason people thought to go with flame cremation is a perception of its eco-friendliness. They figured, why waste land for a dead body? It would be better off perhaps for the environment if I were cremated. On a personal reason, our culture is becoming more secular. So even the religions that have a prohibition against cremation, it's not as widely followed anymore. We're also an increasingly mobile society where we have, in many cases, like I live in New Jersey. If my next of kin moved to California, are they going to move east to visit my dead body? Or isn't it easier to take cremains west with them? There's also changing attitudes driven by baby boomers who are blazing new trails in many walks of life, and they don't feel as bound to the way things used to be done, and some of the way things done resonate with them. As far as flexibility, that refers to the many and growing number of options you have for what to do with the ash, the cremains. I didn't go into depth in them because most of them are in green, but you could, whether it's mixing it with tattoo ink or ceramics, or even make jewelry out of it, or a record album. People, it's different strokes for different folks, and people like the idea of creating lasting memories that way. So it is very popular. And if you are thinking that you still want to have a viewing and you want embalming or whatever, you can still have the body cremated. But as I said, as far as its eco-friendliness, perception isn't reality. This chart shows the environmental costs of cremation. Starting with, it takes a lot of energy to heat the retorts, which is what you call the ovens. The mercury that gets released is from the fillings in our, the dental fillings, and there's other emissions that are released into the air and the water, and they're pollutants. The radiopharmaceutical contamination refers to people who perhaps died from cancer and were treated with radiation. There's some toxins that are emitted connected to that. In terms of carbon, it's got a huge carbon footprint, equivalent to driving a car for 700 miles. And the last thing is not a pollution thing, but if people think that, well, you know, if I get cremated, my body could be plant food, you can't take the ashes directly and use it for plantings because it has an extremely high pH content. So perception isn't reality. There are some new advances in these, you know, the equipment being used, the retorts that have better filters and better efficiency that may hold promise. But right now, it's not something considered to be green. However, because it is popular and for, you know, the reasons I listed, or if you have any of your own where you steer toward fire cremation, you can perhaps offset it by what you determine to do with the cremains, other than cemetery burial in a biodegradable container. For instance, you could, if you're going to keep the cremains on your mantle, you should get a biodegradable container for that. And you don't have to sacrifice the aesthetics. This is a nice looking urn and it's made from gourd. Another option that's very popular is to use the nutrients in our bodies to grow new plant life. On the left, you see a kit for growing a tree using cremains in your home indoors. And on the right is in a forest, there's many companies, some that have bought forests and let you put the cremains mixed with other soil amendments around the base of an established tree, or you can plant another new tree there. And in some cases, like offered by Destination Destiny, you could plant a tree above the grave in a green cemetery. There's also a water option if you and your family are boating enthusiasts or scuba diving or what have you. So with water options, if you're going to scatter, you have to go out 3 nautical miles and use either a biodegradable container that will dissolve in the water like the one in the middle, or if it's not biodegradable, at least take it, you know, home with you and recycle it. If you have a boat, you could go yourself, but if not, there are services that will take you out to the required distance from the shoreline, and you could have the release of the cremains there, and they'll take small groups, so you can have a ceremony there that you may find very meaningful as well. And then it's an all-in-one thing. You have like the funeral, if that's what you determine will happen or where it will happen, as well as the final resting place for the cremains. On the far right, you see something representing memorial reef balls, and that's another option. Here they take the cremains and they mix it with specially formulated type of concrete to create these reef balls that you see, and it gets a plaque with the person's name, and the family can make little, you know, decorations in it, so there's more family engagement. Anyway, these reef balls are taken out and dropped into the water where they, you know, go to the floor, and they support marine life and coral. And it's a great way to have a final resting place in the water. You would get, often many of these companies will give you a geotag with GPS coordinates so you can find it on the map, or if you scuba dive, your family could go, you know, there to see where you are. So that's an option. If you do like the idea of green burial, but maybe you're wed to the funeral home that your family has used forever, or the cemetery because generations of your family are buried there, as I mentioned earlier, there are still some things you could do to green your conventional burial and funeral, such as, again, forego embalming, or say you want non-toxic embalming fluids or dry ice. You know, you don't have to, even if you have a viewing, you don't have to be embalmed, but if you don't have a viewing, there's really no reason for embalming. again, your choice of container. Make sure that it's eco-friendly. And if the funeral home doesn't offer one, by law, they have to accept a casket that you buy elsewhere online from a local artisan. They have to accept it. If you're opting for cremation, you could rent a casket for the funeral and then go to a more eco-friendly, low-cost, not so great-looking one for cremation because, you know, let's face it, it's going to be burnt. Pay attention to the burial outfit. So as we were talking with the shrouds, just make sure, even if you're in regular clothes, that it's made from natural fibers. Ideally, an outfit that you already own versus buying something new. As far as funeral programs, rather than printing out programs and handing them out, why not post them on a board? Think about eco-friendly mementos to give out. There's great seed packets that you could personalize with the person's name, or different bookmarks and such that have embedded seeds in them that could be planted later. The hearse is probably a long shot, but at least the vehicle for family transportation to the cemetery. See if the funeral home has electric vehicles or hybrids or such, or if not, you could always borrow one or get someone to drive in one. Be on the lookout for these more energy efficient retorts and some of the newer systems for cremation. Some of the some of the crematoriums out there have already made great strides, so talk to them about it. Make a donation to a carbon offset fund or a global warming initiative. Consider the food that you're going to be serving at the gathering and make sure it's organic. And any leftover, donate or recycle. Don't just throw it away. And then finally, you could mix it up a little bit. You know, home funerals, as I said, was the way it all used to be done. And if you do the prep work for the body and the ritual at home, you could make sure you're using only organic, biodegradable materials and containers. And then you could have the body transported to the cemetery for burial. Or you can still bury your body on your own property. You have to get permits. For guidance, go to the Home Funeral Alliance if this interests you. Okay, everything that I talked about up until this point is available in New Jersey now if needed. But you may have heard about some alternative disposition methods that are legal in other states and that may be coming to New Jersey at some point that you may want to watch. The first is alkaline hydrolysis. It's also known as aquamation, water cremation, biocremation, or flameless cremation, because it uses water instead of fire. It's about 95% water, 5% alkaline, which is, you know, substance that are in a lot of personal care products. It's very gentle. And because it's not firing up ovens and the like, it's 90% energy savings, or a tenth of the carbon footprint of flame cremation. You're not burning anything, so there's no greenhouse gas emissions, there's no fossil fuel burning. And also, whereas with flame cremation, you have to remove the batteries in pacemakers because they'll explode. You don't have to do that with alkaline hydrolysis. So, you know, you're not disturbing the body, you're not paying for a surgery right before the water cremation. And also, because there's no fire, if you have a hip implant or any other implant, they come out pristine, so they're easy to recycle. It's not always the case with fire cremation. You get 20% more ash remains, and they're a lot wider, which may work better with whatever you decide to do with the ashes. You don't need a casket or a container. So there's another savings. And if you do, though, decide that you want to embalm the body, you can. It won't interfere with the process. This shows you one such system that one of the is used by one of the companies that offers this service. It is not, as I said, available in New Jersey, but it is something where the body is put in this chamber, you know, in water. It's 300 degrees and it takes 4 to 6 hours. If it's used at that temperature, it'll take twice as long if it's at 200 degrees. But between the water, the alkaline solution, the gentle rocking, etc., what happens is that the soft tissue and the organs dissolve into a sterile, non-toxic effluent, and what remains is the skeleton, similar to fire cremation. So the skeleton then goes in a cremulator, and then that's how you get the ashes. That effluent, in some cases, is disposed of through the sewer system, but it doesn't do any harm. There's no contaminants. As I said, it's sterile liquid. But some of the providers have arrangements with either conservation lands or different farms where non-food products are grown, where it's donated as like fertilizer. So this is a more eco-friendly alternative to fire cremation. It's been widely used for a while for pets, as well as by some institutions like the Mayo Clinic for cadavers disposition. It represents a cost saving and it's gentler on the environment. It's currently legal in 25 states, but as you'll note, it's not available in all of them because legal doesn't mean available. New Jersey's not on the list, as we said. Some providers will pick up bodies from neighboring states. And, you know, that's on an individual basis, but as you can see, there are none close to New Jersey to make it a reasonable option. I should tell you that alkaline hydrolysis is compelling on an environmental front. The science is great, it's gentle. The business model has some challenges, which may be what's impeding its availability, but hopefully it'll be addressed and solved because I think it's worth looking at. The second option that isn't available yet here is called natural organic reduction, also known as terramation or human composting. It's newer. It's a process that transforms human remains into a soil amendment that can be used to regenerate the earth that supports us our whole lives. Compared to conventional burial, it saves a lot of energy and as well as money. It's very gentle, excuse me. The time it takes depends on the provider. So that's why I have 45 days to 12 weeks. Some of the time the body is in the vessel, some of the time it's in an aeration bin. But going back to the gentle for a second, it's because the body in a biodegradable bag, and you'll see it in a slide, is put on a bed of organic material, alfalfa, straw, hay, and microbiomes into a chamber that's moisture and heat controlled. What it nets is a cubic yard of soil amendment, which is really too much for anyone to use. Although if people want it all, they could have it all and use it as they see fit. But for the 4 providers currently in the business, many of them have arrangements with different, again, land conservation places or different farms and such where it could be used to nurture the soil. What happens to the bones with Nor, as it's called, varies. One outfit, after they grind the bones, because they somewhat decompose, but not fully, after they grind up the bones, they put it back into the soil amendment. Others offer it as ash. It depends on which company you go with. Unlike the other cremations, Nor is not compatible with embalming. So you can't consider doing that. It's very easy to recycle the implants again because there's nothing really happening to it. It's available in 6 states. The first was Washington, the state of, not DC, and the most recent was New York. But as I said, legal does not equal available. And right now, there's only providers in Washington and in Colorado. I would direct you toward the pioneer of this process, which is called Recompose, and their website is recompose.life to get great information. The other providers' websites are good as well, but Recompose is very graphic and I think is a good way to learn more about it. So let's look at it. It's somewhat like a mausoleum. It kind of looks like a New Age mausoleum. This is Recompose's system. So they have this wall with openings, and each one is called a vessel. And you could see the organic, biodegradable, soft material that the body is ultimately put onto. On the right, you see it goes from this cradle and it's transported into the vessel. And that process is called a laying in ceremony. I think Nor and some of the other providers let you have, they have a chapel if you want to have a funeral first, if you want to watch this. There's all different ways that the ceremony could be handled. But as you see, there's no casket, so that's a saving. So there's no surgery to remove implants. The science, like alkaline hydrolysis, is very promising, especially in urban areas. And that really was the motivation for the founder of Recompose, Katrina Spade, to develop this process. But the business model also is challenging. And it's mostly because it takes so long for full decomposition. You have to do a lot of volume and whatever. I don't want to get into the whole business aspect of it, but as I said, the science is compelling and a lot of people have taken note of it. It's just, we'll see how fast it's available. As far as New Jersey availability for either of the two, I did have a conversation with the state senator that represents the district I live in, and she's currently reviewing the legislation that made these two processes, or one, they're not both available in the same states, but she's looking at the legislation that passed in other states to consider it for New Jersey. So we'll have to see what happens with that. At the end of the day, what it all comes down to is, how do you want to be remembered? How you approach your death and say goodbye should reflect how you live your life. If you're conscious about recycling and maybe even composting, if you drive an electronic vehicle or a hybrid, why would you want to make your last act one that pollutes the planet? Two people who followed this, here's two great examples of people who were eco warriors in life and then in death. On the left was Luke Perry, and he was buried in a mushroom suit. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about the mushroom suit. You could learn about it on the Green Burial Council website, but basically, if you could see the little white lines, those are spores from mushrooms. Mushrooms are great at neutralizing toxins and accelerating decomposition. It's just the efficacy of the suits is in question. So it's admirable that he did that, though. On the right refers to Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who elected to have alkaline hydrolysis and then had his remains buried in a cemetery. So again, they in death did what they did in life. In closing, as this quote says, we don't get, I can't see because the thing's in my way, but we don't inherit the earth from our ancestors or the planet. We borrow it from our children. That's a Native American proverb. I think I've given you a lot to think about. This is the end of my presentation. And I would just close saying that choosing green burial can be a last beautiful gesture to benefit the planet and your loved ones who will inhabit it. Thanks very much. There's my contact information if you have any questions. As I said before, wait, let me stop sharing my screen. Hold on, stop share. Okay. I did want to acknowledge the questions that were sent when you registered. Most of them, I believe, were answered in my presentation, but the big one that came up a lot that I didn't go into a lot of depth about was about cost. And part of it is because it varies, but I'll just say in general, when you look at green burial, I'm talking about in a green cemetery using a green funeral home, if the average conventional burial is estimated to be $8,000, excluding the casket, the grave, and I'm talking by the grave, I'm talking about the plot itself, the opening, the closing, the headstone and an officiant, whatever. So you have to add that all to the 8. With natural burial, the casket is usually a lot. It's if you don't go for the pine box that I showed you, the casket in a conventional funeral will be very expensive. With green burial, it's a lot less. It could be as low as $1,000 to $2,500. The plots are also pretty reasonable. In one cemetery, green cemetery I looked at, it was $1,000, another was $2,500 for the grave itself, and then an incrementally more interment fee. So when you look at it, whereas the conventional burial, minus all the things that I talked about, would be 8,000 plus, with a green burial, it ranged between 8,500 and $11,500, and maybe you're still going to pay for the officiant who's going to run it and just some other cash distributions. But just knowing that you're not going to pay for embalming, you can have a less expensive casket, you're not going to have a very expensive granite headstone, and you're not going to have to buy a burial vault and liner. Those are all tremendous savings. To go further and look at some of those new options and where they fall out price-wise, but I'm not quoting because they're not available here. So by the time they do, who knows how much they would cost. If direct cremation is about $1,000 and traditional cremation you feel is like $1,000 to $2,000, alkaline hydrolysis is supposed to be incrementally more at like $2,000 to $3,000. The NOR, the natural organic reduction, terramation, that is like $4,500 to $7,000. But you have to realize that those options that decompose the bodies where you just get ash, how much more you spend depends on what you decide to do with it. So if you put it on a mantle, you're not spending anymore if you other than the urn or whatever, or you could hold the costs in check. And you could do, step 1 now and save up and do something else, in a year or so. So there's a lot to consider. Those memorial reef balls, I saw a quote, $5,000 to $7,000, but that's an option for some people. And then a lot of the natural cemeteries will let you bury cremains, but those plots are less. The amounts I saw was anywhere from $450 to $800 for the grave itself. So there's a savings there. Another question oft asked pertains to religion. So, you know, full body green burial isn't really an issue. In fact, the Catholic Church and Jewish different denominations of Jewish clergy encourage it. All the other disposition methods, like NOR especially, there's no rulings yet because it's too new. And in most cases, whatever the religious leaders feel about flame cremation, they feel the same about alkaline hydrolysis, with the exception of the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church still encourages full body burial, but they recognize that many people are opting for cremation. So they say, okay, if that's your choice, you can't scatter, you can't have it on the, you know, mantle in an urn. You have to bury it in a Catholic cemetery. That's for fire cremation. But they don't allow alkaline hydrolysis. And they give many reasons, and, you know, I'm not going to get into it, but that's it. With Jews, Orthodox Jews, no cremation, no how. Conservative Jews do the same as the Catholic Church. They acknowledge that it's happening. They would rather you bury a body, you know, a full body, but at least if the cremains are buried Jewishly, not necessarily in a Jewish cemetery, can be in a forest, but with, you know, dignity and Jewish ritual and prayer, then that's the way that would go. I don't think reform has an issue. So that's the religious part. And I think those were the two primary questions that I'll address from beforehand. And I'm happy to take any you may have now. Hopefully I could see you and we could do this the right way. Anyone have a question? Okay, so let me see if I see Alan Wells. Please unmute yourself, or
Yes,
the
thank you.
host. Okay.
Yes, I was wondering if there's a home viewing, which I think I would prefer. How long can that be without embalming?
I would direct you to the homefuneralsalliance.org website. They'll give you great guidance. You have to have ice, you know, so you have to do something, not just have the body, but you could definitely go with a couple of days, but I would tell you to look there.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else want, Alan, you want to go for another? You have to unmute yourself. After Joe, nice to meet you. I'll call on you next, but Alan, go ahead. Ask another.
Sorry, I muted quickly. I meant to ask, did you say that home burial was actually legal in New Jersey?
It is. You have to get permits from your local municipality.
Oh, I see. How interesting. Thank you again.
You're welcome. Joe Sipigora.
First of all, I want to thank you. That was a phenomenal presentation in like 45 or 50 minutes. You answered a lot of questions, and
Thank you.
I'd like to know if you're rentable because there are about 3 or 4 of us from our fellowship here, but I think there are many others who could be very interested. So how do you make your services available?
You can email
And the
me.
recording as well. The recording, I believe, is being made today, so I'd like to know how that's going to be used.
It will be posted on our website as well as my own website.
Great.
Feel free to email me at shari@mygreatgoodbye.com.
And may we just use the recording at whenever, you know, if we want to set up a little program? Of course, they wouldn't have the benefit of being able to ask you questions on the spot, but they could email you with a question if we couldn't answer it. Would that be all right to do that?
I would have to talk. Jerry's saying yes. So yes.
Okay, so, and will the recording, it'll be posted on our Funeral Society website? Oh,
Yes,
that's phenomenal. Thank you. That's terrific. Thank you so much.
you're welcome. Anyone else? I see some questions in the chat, but you know what? I don't see all the hands. Does anyone see any hands raised? If not, I'm gonna look in chat. Okay, so chat says, does New Jersey offer reef balls as an option? Yes, if you, again, and I'm not working for any of these companies, we're in New Jersey and they're in New Jersey. They're a resource that DestinyDestinationMemorials.com has a reef ball service. They have an affiliation with Memorial Reef Balls to make it available. Okay, we talked about that. Someone wants to know a bit about my business services. That's very kind of you. A big part of what I do, because I, like the funeral FCANNJ, promote advanced planning, but I feel to make a good plan, you have to know what your options are. So I do a lot of education to help people know what their options are. I'm agnostic. I don't push my beliefs on anyone. I follow what theirs are. So for instance, if a client is an Orthodox Jew, I won't bring up cremation unless they do, because I know that that's something they're probably not interested in, but I do try to help people make plans so that everything's taken care of. The family doesn't have to guess while grieving. And then I also help people tell their story, which is a beautiful gift to give to, your loved ones before you pass, etc. So thank you for that question. Is there a compatible organization in Ocean County, Southern Jersey? Does the Princeton group cover that area? Do any of my colleagues know that? Yes, Bob says yes. And someone had to run, so that's cool. Okay. I know I need a drink of water. Does anyone have any other questions? Oh, okay, wait, I saw a hand and then Joe, I'll go back. Bob Prout, you have to unmute yourself. Bob, or unmute him. Bob, are you part of the Prout Funeral Home?
I am.
Oh, a great website.
Don't throw stones at me.
No, if you heard before I knew you were on, I looked at your website and it was very easy and you were very proud of your green burial offerings. And I thought that was a great example of doing it right.
We've been involved in natural burial and greener funerals pretty much from the beginning. And to answer Mr. Wells' question about home funerals, the way the law is written is that any person deceased after 48 hours must either be embalmed or refrigeration, as Shari was saying. You can have a home funeral that goes longer by using dry ice, which is totally legal and natural. There is like a wicker tray that you can use so that you're not even using a casket or a shroud, but at least you're in something while you're at the house and you just put some dry ice underneath. Keep in mind that most natural burials or home funerals are folks that don't want to extend and have a 3 or 4 day wake. It's more for a gathering. And the most important thing is the gathering of the immediate family with the support of friends or neighbors. So that can all usually take place depending on if there's a grandchild in California coming in or whatever. That usually takes place sooner than later. So that's absolutely no problem at all. And the other thing that I would like to mention is that with cremation in particular, anybody who has a pacemaker has to have that removed prior to the cremation. Your options would be either to send the pacemaker back to the manufacturer, if you'd like, if your family would like to keep it, that's legal. Never had that, but it's legal. But I would recommend that the University of Michigan Medical Center has the project My Heart, Your Heart. And what they're doing is they're recycling pacemakers to send out to third world countries. Last June, I think it was, they sent out their entire cardiac staff, doctors, nurses, everybody to sub-Saharan Africa, and they implanted 30 to 40 of these pacemakers, almost like a Doctors Without Borders mixed in with a little bit of Peace Corps. So that's a lot better. There used to be a number of companies, 2 or 3 anyway, that would recycle pacemakers, and the FDA, probably at the behest of the pacemaker lobbyists, ruled it illegal. And Michigan is trying to get that overturned at this point. And as far as the one thing to keep in mind about human composting, there was a legislation, Shari, that was introduced. It hit a roadblock because the way it was set up was that the funeral director would be doing a lot of the work at the cemetery, and Title 8A specifically prohibits a funeral home from being involved in a cemetery business and a cemetery business from being involved in a funeral business. And so they're going back to the New Jersey's kind of unique in their laws because it's going back to the Revolution. And I think the sponsors of the bill have put it on hold while they look over the nuances of Title 8A. So, and the other thing about human composting is, along with the cubic foot, is that flame cremation will take the bone, the skeletal remains, down to a very brittle state, whereas the composting, you still have the full skeleton, and it takes a little bit more to put that into a state where most families would want to take it home. So just my 2 cents. Very good presentation though, Shari.
Thank
Very
you.
well informed.
Thank you for the information you shared. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
Anyone else? Any final questions?
I think Joe has a question.
Joe, you have a question? Go ahead.
Yeah, just,
Nope, you're muted again. Wait. Did you self-mute, or is everyone? Joe,
okay, I think it was inferred, but are there any legislative bills in New Jersey that you know of that we could get behind, or what?
Currently, no. I only spoke to my state senator, and she's reviewing, as I said, and
Mhm.
her chief of staff was kind enough to lay out what the next steps would be if she gave it the nod. And there's really nothing to do until a bill is sponsored and introduced. That's when petitions should happen and all that to get more people to vote. But there's
Yeah.
steps before that where it's not, really up to.
Well, New Jersey has so many regulations that, I thought I would automatically think there'd be a lot of limitations in New Jersey, because I know that other than, is it Prout or Prout? Prout? I mean, there have not been, your funeral home has been in existence for a lot of years, because I looked at, I think over 20 years ago, I was looking and I saw your business come up as the only one in New Jersey, I think, at that time. But anyway, I'm just trying to anticipate what kinds of heavy regulation there might be against it, any of these alternatives. So I don't know if there are or not, but
It's hard to tell. I mean, some of the, AH and NOR is not popular as much in the Middle Plains states, and coinciding to where a lot of casket manufacturers are. Because they have an interest, right, in keeping people in caskets. So, and there's a lot of back with the cemeteries. Cemeteries have rules, and yeah.
okay.
Hope for the best.
Joe, you have a good point, and that is an area that FCANNJ has yet to move into to become a legislative force, along with the FCA of Princeton. Then we would have the two organizations working together to encourage the elected officials to move in the directions we wish they would.
Right. And the fact that NOR was passed in New York, you know, so close here. If a provider opens up, it might be close enough if it's not all the way in the Finger Lakes or something for many of us to take advantage of. But just the fact that one of our neighbors approved it, it does kind of ease it a little bit perhaps, but who knows? Okay. Bob, do you think? I don't see.
I do see that someone had asked, who can see the transcript or the recording? And I guess within the next week or 2 weeks, depending on how it works, it'll be on the FCA NNJ website, correct? Hopefully by the middle of next month at the latest, you can find.
I would think so.
And in closing, Sherry, thank you for that excellent and comprehensive introduction to trends in green burials. I've appreciated all your effort that went into it. And with Clara's help, I also want to recognize Clara Jenkins, who is our webmaster and technology person and helps us carry the annual meeting ball across the finish line. So thank you. And once again, I appeal to our members and our friends who are watching or listening or maybe future watching this, that we are desperate seeking a few more volunteers to help us carry forth the mission of this organization. So thank you. I believe our annual meeting is complete unless there's more questions. And thank you again, Sherry, for an excellent program. I appreciate it. And thank you all for joining us today very much. We appreciate it.
To adjourn. Take care, everyone.
I will end the meeting for the rest of us. Unless someone has something to say right now.